Hello, everybody. Oh, it's so good to see you all here. I appreciate you coming. I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, but first, I would like to remind you to take advantage of any opportunities you have to go up to any of our speakers. We've got right outside the speaker room across this direction. There's a little seating area. We'll have speakers sitting there throughout the week. And then, of course, folks after their talks or at the lunch tomorrow, feel free to come up and introduce yourself, ask questions, have a conversation. I'm one of the chairs, and one of the things that we do here is try to select speakers that truly enjoy interacting with all of you and having those conversations, answering questions, and so please take advantage of that opportunity. What do we got here? And then I should definitely thank our sponsors. So our event partner is Microsoft, which makes sense, right? Without Microsoft, I think most of us would not be so happy. We've got fantastic products and tools that we use from all of the things they do. Our platinum sponsors are Brainstorm, CompuNet, SolarWinds, and WiseJ.net. And our gold sponsor is Progress. And so I'd like to thank all of them for making this event possible and also making fantastic products that many of us use and enjoy on a regular basis. With that, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Mads Kristensen flew in from Microsoft. Many of you probably know the name, and I didn't know this until I read this card. Many of the extensions in Visual Studio that all of us use and that make our lives better on a daily basis. Did you realize that Mads has created almost 200 extensions for Visual Studio? It's just mind-boggling, right, to think about that. So his title is Principal Product Manager on the Visual Studio team. With that, he's going to come up and talk about creating some fantastic, beautiful software for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. Hello, everybody. Oh, yeah. Isn't that cool? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me here this morning. Our story begins with a tweet from Robert, who said, "Considering programming is my life, I wish I felt my tools wanted to support me." Now, in the developer division at Microsoft, we build software to help make our users successful. In fact, we cannot be successful without our users being successful. That's how we measure our own success. And so getting a tweet like this kind of goes very much against the core nature of who we are, how we see ourselves. And there's nothing particularly unique about maybe Robert's feeling at the time of this tweet. We've heard something like this before. Sometimes we don't produce the best software. It can be frustrating sometimes. But this tweet in particular was one that, I don't know, it really got to me. And we started talking about it internally and realized that maybe, just maybe, we were missing the mark a little bit on some of the stuff we've been doing. So it made us question how we build software, why we build software, and are we actually listening to our users? Do we show them the respect that maybe they deserve? And more importantly, are our goals even aligned? Do we know that for a fact? We think we're listening. I mean, I know we're listening because for a few different reasons. One is we have a UX lab. We bring in users, we sit them down in a lab in front of a computer, we track their eye movements, the mouse, everything, and we give them tasks. Hey, use our product to do something, and we see how they interact with the product. We learn so much. This is qualitative data gathering, right? This is truly listening. We're seeing what they're doing. If you've never sitting next to one of your users interacting with your product, then you probably have no idea exactly how they're using your product. That's what we learned. We thought we knew how our users use the product, but when you see it in action, you'll be shocked at just, first of all, how many different ways that they interact with your product, but they do it in ways you did not anticipate. So we knew all this information, so absolutely we're listening, right? We also gather quantitative data, right? We ask for surveys. Oh, you installed our product? Here's a survey. You uninstalled the product? We ask for a survey. When you're using the product, hey, you want to rate this? How useful was it? Do you want to recommend this to someone you know? When you're sleeping, we're going to email you with a link to a survey. So we're definitely listening, right? Because the more information we have, the better decisions we can make. This makes sense. Except, for the 14 years I've been at Microsoft, I've seen how we've done more and more of this. And of course, we're not the only ones doing this. You see it everywhere. You can't buy a pack of gum at the convenience store without you coming home to see an email of them asking how to rate your purchase experience, right? So we're not the only ones doing this. But I've seen us do this all the time, more and more over the years, and I don't know if I can see that I've seen an increase in product and user satisfaction as a result. It's hard to prove one way or the other, of course, right? But it's not clear to me that that's the case. Maybe, in fact, what we're doing is that we're using users as tools. Could it be that by gathering all this qualitative and quantitative information, being data-driven, right, or informed by data, could it be that we're just kind of gathering that information to create evidence for the features we want to build so that our managers and our stakeholders and our engineering teams or whatever it is, that they have a hard time saying no to our suggestions? Because here's the data that proves that users want it. Could that be the case? Well, I think definitely we were listening, but maybe we weren't hearing what was said. So we can measure, NPS scores, CSAT scores, all sorts of things, but were we actually hearing the users at the end of the day? Because the users were pretty clear. Like, we get hundreds of feature requests every single day from all our products. In the developer division, we got a lot of different products. And they all have these online bug trackers and feature requests websites. And as I said, hundreds a day, votes, comments, a lot of engagement here from users. So it was very clear that you told us exactly what you wanted us to do. But we didn't hear it always. So absolutely, there was much for us here to learn. Right? Something had to give. And so about 12 months ago, some colleagues and myself, we thought, okay, enough is enough. Let's start over. Let's rethink our approach and see what we can come up with. So this is our journey, and I hope there will be some lessons in here that you can take with you and you might learn from and use in your organizations as well, for your users, whether they are external or internal users. All right, so let's start with software developers. Show of hands, how many software developers are in the house? Okay, that's a lot of software developers. So for those of you who did not raise your hand, here is what a software developer is, according to this slide at least. So, when we build software, we do it partly to developers. And oftentimes, you're using our products all day long, every day. And if that's kind of a third of what you're doing is to code or use our products, that means that half of your waking lives are spent in our tools. Half your waking lives. That's a huge responsibility for us to make sure that we get it right and we work on making your lives as good as they can be, really. And of course, this has to have a huge impact on your general happiness, because one thing is that you want to be productive at work, but if work is like half your waking lives, then there's probably a big part of it that's just general happiness, not work happiness, but just satisfaction with life in general, really. So as I said, it's a huge responsibility to us because these tools become our second home. So when Robert was talking about not getting support, was he actually talking about he was unhappy with just like the general happiness issue that this was causing? Well, maybe, right? Because when we're dealing with our second homes, things matter. It matters what color the wall is on, our walls are, what kind of rug we have under the dining room tables. We care about details because when it's every day, all those little things truly matter. And part of, I think, our reasoning is that, hey, well, that's not a, small little feature is not a big thing. That's not something that's going to move the needle. It's not something that maybe have big impact on my career as a product manager. If I go fix a little thing, I want to build a big thing, right? And we also think, marketing-wise, if we can come out and say, here's a great new feature that really changes everything, that enables new things for you. Like, that's a big moment. That's the one we want to chase. And maybe sometimes we forget these little things. But when we look back at all those feature requests that you had for us, a lot of the things you were asking for were, in fact, the little things. The majority of the things you ask for are the little things. Here's a little thing, color themes. Of course, everybody's got color themes nowadays, but we added 8 or 10 to Visual Studio as a direct customer ask. You wanted more color themes. And now there's going to be a bunch of you in the room that says, well, why did you spend time on this when you still have this bug open that, I opened this bug 2 years ago, you haven't fixed it, and then you go ahead and create a purple bubble gum theme? Like, how does that even make sense? Well, if you look at the marketplace for Visual Studio, for VS Code, and others that have extensions you can install, new color themes, you can see that they have millions and millions of downloads. So clearly, it has a huge impact on a lot of people's lives. And so both users and also us internally, when we're building features, right, sometimes we just have to stop and enjoy the little things. They matter because we use them every day, many times a day. Okay? So those little tiny things, they become big. And when we do them over and over again, they have to be smooth. They have to be close to perfect, right? And so we started picking these features from the backlog, from those tools where you request features. We started saying, hey, what happens if we start implementing a bunch of these little features? Is that going to impact our users? Are they going to even notice? Is it something that they are going to be perceiving as a really good thing? Is the customer satisfaction score going to go up? Yes. Absolutely. This is one of the clearest examples that I think I've ever witnessed in how to change customer perception. And it was very cheap to do. It was very fast to do. It's very quick for us to take some of those feature requests that are small, has a decent amount of votes on them, so we know they have some sort of impact. But they may only take 2 days to implement or a week to implement. So what happens if we introduce that is that, if we implement those type of ideas, is that very, very quickly we see people notice and they give us the most positive feedback that we've ever gotten. And it was almost instantly. So we kept doing it for the next update and for the next update, and these tweets just kept coming in. Tweets, comments on blog posts, videos. It was, so all sorts of engagement, all sorts of comments and responses to what we're doing. It became, in fact, so successful that we now have it as part of our goals, our OKRs, from a leadership perspective. This is absolutely crucial. So we just came in, we were just a few people that thought, hey, let's try this, right? No managers involved here. These were all kind of just low-ranking individuals like myself, and we were able to demonstrate something. Leadership immediately went, this is awesome. Now it's a pillar of everything we do. To reduce the paper cuts, to do delighters, something that puts smiles on people's faces. Like just, it's also a way of showing respect. Hey, you've been asking for this for years. Let's go ahead and do this. So, as I said, leadership buy-in, absolutely crucial, because it's not just a matter of doing what we think is the right thing. Everything has to work toward it. So reward structure, right? So internally, having the reward structure so that you don't just get rewarded for building that big feature, you know, that big moment, that huge impact thing, but there's also rewards. You know, come bonus time, you don't want to be punished for doing the things that the users asked you to do, right? That's kind of what it boils down to sometimes. So there's a whole culture thing, there's a whole reward structure, and when you get that full buy-in, it becomes part of who you are. It becomes part of your DNA. So that was absolutely fantastic. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do those big things, by the way. I want to be absolutely clear. But what it does mean to us is that we call these small things, we call them the fundamentals. And just like when you build a house, if the foundation is not strong, it doesn't matter what you build on top of it, right? So it goes before anything else. So that was a lesson that was very interesting to learn, I'd say. All right. Sometimes, though, we were talking about the goals, right? You have the user goals, you have your business goals, and they don't always align. They cannot always align, right? You might want to do something that you see something like far future, like in 5 to 10 years, the world is probably moving that direction. If we position ourselves right now to, you know, be ahead of that transition, you know, that might be a good thing. And so you start doing some stuff that the users are like, well, that's not going to be helpful to me right now, right? But you think from a business perspective that it will be in the future. So you can even imagine, and even in that case, you're still thinking the user goal will eventually align, right? So it's maybe not a conflict, but there is some friction sometimes. The problem is that we started seeing that there were some cases where the goals of the user and the business would drift apart. And this is really, really, really hard, because if you build a feature that the business says, hey, you should build this feature because we want you to sell more of this type of product, so you should do that, right? And the user's like, hey, I just want to write a console app that queries my SQL database or whatever. And so these two goals are kind of conflicting. The thing is that when we spend a lot of time doing business goals, all that time could have been spent working on a user's goal, right? So not only do we build something that the users don't use, they don't want, it might create noise in the UI, and the opportunity cost of not building what the users want just makes the whole thing even more frustrating, and we create these lose-lose situations. What we really want, of course, is to build win-win situations where we align our business goals and our user goals as much as we possibly can. And it is a balance act. And this balance is hard to get right, but we have to keep on going because, with Robert, we want to support Robert. We want everybody to feel that when they use our tools, those tools support you. And not, hey, let's go and try to upsell you on something that's completely not related to what you're currently doing. And we've done that. I remember early days of Azure, for instance. I was a young .NET developer, and I would build that console app sitting on top of SQL database. And oh, you should publish this to Azure, a notification or advertisement or something like that. I'm like, well, I'm not the decision maker on that. Why are you interrupting my flow to tell me something like that? It was really annoying. So you definitely don't want to be this person. I've been that person before. I don't ever want to be that person again. And again, it's about showing respect, right? But we want to make sure that we align the business goals and the user goals. Sometimes it's not a business goal that gets in the way. It could be our internal process. So we get hundreds, as I was saying, hundreds of user requests, feature requests every day. And they, make their way into the backlog. They get to the bottom of the backlog. Maybe you get some votes. Some of them rise up in the backlog, and you're sitting there as a product owner or product manager or, product team and thinking, okay, this backlog is growing. I don't even know what to do anymore. Like, this is getting noisy. There's so many things in here. I don't like this. Okay, so what can I do as someone that manages a backlog to reduce all this, to make more sense of my backlog? And it turns out you can just kind of close down those user feature requests. And voila, your backlog feels much more manageable from that point on. Hooray. So we thought that was a good idea some years ago because we had our internal process and things were getting noisy. And we thought, oh, well, what if we close down those old feature requests that didn't have that many votes on them? And then we can always open them again if they get more votes coming in. Maybe it's a way to communicate to the user. We kind of try to come up with these ideas of why that was a good idea, right? And some managers agree, yeah, that's communication. Great. So, of course, it turned out to do the exact opposite, as you can imagine. A good idea is a good idea whether it's 2 years old, whether it has 1 million votes or 1 vote. There's nothing wrong with that idea. And we also saw very quickly that, those ideas that we closed down or that didn't get a lot of votes for years just grew stale. All of a sudden, we would implement it because we were doing something in that area of our product anyway. And so we didn't even know, we're never going to get to this feature request. We didn't know that in advance, it turned out, just looking at the numbers. So it turned out that there's another way of cleaning up your backlog. How about implementing those feature requests? That gives you the same result. It takes a little bit longer, but it gets you the same result. So of course, this is all super simple. This makes hopefully a lot of sense. There's nothing new here, so to say. But there's nothing easy about this because you got a lot of managers, you got a lot of stakeholders, you got partner teams, you got all sorts of different user cohorts, and you got to herd the cats, right? You got to make sure that everyone is aligned, everyone gets whatever they need, and you have to stand your ground, and this is not always easy. And at the end of the day, it's about showing respect. So let's find a good example of a time when we were able to align our business goal, our user goals, and show respect. Any data people in the house? Hands up, hands up. Oh yeah, we got some. All right, so you're going to like this one. SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS. You probably know. I've used this for a few decades. So this is a free tool Microsoft provides for you to manage your SQL Server database, whether it's on-prem or it's in the cloud. And it's very popular. It's very popular. Everybody likes it. Everybody has a bunch of problems with it too. But it's kind of a popular piece of software. Now, it was built on top of what's called the Visual Studio isolated shell. Visual Studio used to make a product that was free that was called the isolated shell. It's basically Visual Studio without anything in it, except for all the infrastructure for menus and tool windows and all that jazz. And you could put your own app inside Visual Studio. Visual Studio, the shell, could host your app. And that's what SSMS was using. That's how they were built. So they were built on top of that Visual Studio thing. But we discontinued the isolated shell. The last version that we produced was in 2017. So SSMS was kind of getting old. It still got updated, the stuff that's inside, but the shell itself could not be updated anymore. There was no new update to take. And as years passed, that became a bigger and bigger problem. And if we look at what SSMS was struggling with, it was a lot of user requests for features that they simply could not honor, like dark theme, run on 64-bit, stuff like that. Huge customer asks that had just not been possible. But it was a free tool, and so what is the incentive really to re-architect that big tool kind of from the ground up without there being an obvious business goal? But there's no money in it for Microsoft, right, here in this case. So how could the team think about this? How could they honor and respect those user requests and still have a business goal fulfilled? So we had some great product people that went back and started thinking about this and looked at the data, and it turned out that the user numbers for SSMS was lower, much lower, reported than the actual numbers. So we thought maybe we just had like maybe a few million. It turned out to be a lot more users every month using the product. And so all of a sudden, it was like, okay, we have many millions of users. Okay, we want to have them stay on SQL Server and update to the next version of Visual Studio, right? Yep, we do. All right. We also want them to be super productive and happy and make SQL Server and Microsoft products very sticky with those users, right? Yep. All right. We also wanted to have so that you can easily interact with SQL Server databases in the cloud, all that stuff, take advantage of all the new technology, make it easier to basically make it so that all the advanced features of SQL Server become kind of easier to use for everybody, and so everybody gets even happier and all that. Yep, all that stuff. Okay, so slowly those two circles just overlap more and more and more. And so last week, I'm very happy to say, if you hadn't seen that, we released the first preview of SQL Server Management Studio version 21. Yes. Okay, so that was interesting for a couple of reasons here. There was a lot more people clapping than raised their hands on database people. So there's definitely some user overlap here, huh? People that use maybe Visual Studio and SQL Server Management Studio. Anyway, this is fantastic news because this is the first version of of SSMS that now runs on the latest version of Visual Studio. In fact, it is now a flavor of Visual Studio. So technically speaking, you have Visual Studio Community, Pro, Enterprise. Now you have SSMS. So that's technically speaking. That's, of course, not how it is for anyone that uses it. You just download, install it like you would normally. But it is built technically as if it was a SKU of Visual Studio. And that's fantastic news, by the way, because that means we're going to use the same installer, which is a proven technology. It's really good at what it does. It can automatically update. That means all the security patches, all that type of stuff will automatically flow in. You'll get that update. Eventually, we can look at like the Windows update or the Microsoft update mechanism that Visual Studio now has. Will come in here. So like we can get those Patch Tuesday security updates rolled out. All the management for IT, all the security stuff, you can manage it all, with Intune or whatever it is that you use for that. Group policy. Fantastic stuff from that point of view. But because it runs in a modern shell, we get a bunch of features. So finally, we get 64-bit support. It can even run on ARM. Right? Full Git, TFS integration, all that stuff. There'll be Copilot coming in, dark theme, pink bubblegum theme, any theme you can think of will be available here, including extensions. That includes the SQL formatter extension, by the way. So you can finally get that nice formatting of your stored procedures and whatnot. So, and a lot more, of course, to come. This is just the beginning. Not all of this is in just yet in the first preview. Some of it is coming down the line. But this is it. And because it's now kind of technically a SKU of Visual Studio, that means that it will always be up to date. Okay? So it will never fall behind again. And so we're very, very excited. I'm very proud of the team for pulling this off. This was a big technical endeavor. So be relentless in aligning those users and business goals, create those win-win situations. So this is the developer division's strategy. This is who we are. This is what we do. We build tools and services developers love and enterprises trust. I absolutely love this strategy, by the way, because that means I can concentrate my entire effort of everything I do at work putting smiles on people's faces. That's my job. I absolutely love this. But in here is a challenge hidden in these words. It talks about developers and enterprises. So that's potentially 2 or more types of users that has different goals. So not a business goal and a user goal, but different types of user goals that may or may not be colliding. This is very common. You have a product, and there's a difference between the user of the product and maybe the people that buys the product or makes the decision to buy the product. So it could be your developers, your DBAs, your cybersecurity people, right, that uses the product, but it's your CTO or your team leads or whatever that buys it. So just right there, that one example, you'll see that there's maybe different goals aligned. And of course, we all know some of the classic goals, IT, they're like, oh, you have to, let's secure our fleet as much as possible, log everything down. And then the devs are like, I can't work without being local admin, sorry. Okay, and then you have that conflict. Product and sales is another, classic one. And the goal for us always when we try to build software is to make sure that whenever we do something for one user, we don't create problems for other users. Right? We don't want to solve a problem by creating problems for others. No, instead, we want to create something that's lovable. So we've all heard about the minimal viable product. Something that was invented, this term, the origin of this was to create prototypes or experiments to put in front of users to get their feedback, their interaction patterns, and so on. Today, people kind of use MVPs as, hey, let's just throw some code at the wall and see, and just wait for user feedback. That's agile, right? And that's MVP, minimal, yeah, it kind of works. But the way we're looking at this now, and this, by the way, this is not our invention. So this is an established kind of thing, but it is to create a minimal, lovable product. So do not ship something that will make some of your users unhappy, right? Keep iterating, keep going till you find that idea, till you find that implementation, that design. That does not sacrifice one user cohort over another, but you just keep going, figure it out, okay? Don't produce or release software that is not lovable, even if it's a minimal product, even if it is for experimentation purposes, right? A/B experiments or whatever it is that you might do. Because unhappy users, they're not going to answer very nicely on our surveys, are they? They're not going to go ahead and recommend our software to their friends and family and whatnot. Probably what they're going to do is the exact opposite of that. All right. And then we got this guy. How do we test our product? How do we make sure that when we then release our software that we don't break anybody? Any IT pros in the room? Hands up. A few hands go up. All right, so you know this. You've seen this before, something like this before. This will show your age if you've seen this before, I guess. For a long time, and maybe still today, but at least for a long time, it was very common that whenever we produced new software, a new major version of Visual Studio, whatever it might be, IT would go, we're going to wait for the first service pack before we're doing this. Let the other companies test your software out before we get on board. This is very common, and we hate that because we want you to have the latest and greatest that opens up new doors, new possibilities, so you can fully take advantage of our cloud and AI and all these things that make you happy, make us happy, make everybody happy, and you're like, nah, let's just wait 6 months. no, please don't. Right, so this is like not a win-win situation where like it's kind of a problematic. IT might be kind of happy about this a little bit, but the users, they want to be on the bleeding edge. Some users do sometimes, right? And so, not the happiest situation. So what do we do now differently to make sure that when we release a new version, that we do not break anybody? Well, it all starts with dog fooding, to eat our own dog food, as you might have heard. So when we build Visual Studio, we use the nightly builds. So whenever that we release a new major version of Visual Studio, I always joke. I say, hey, did you know Visual Studio 2022 was built using Visual Studio 2022? Because it was. Because every day we update the build, get the nightly build, and that's what we use for the day. And we report bugs. We gather feedback. We open suggestions on not just our own team, on our own little part of the software that we own, but on everybody. And we do this as soon and as early as we possibly can. Okay, we jump from whatever version we're on to use the dog food build. And then we track to make sure that everybody does this. Not so much anymore, but in the beginning, like, 8 years ago or something, when we really started doing this for real, we had these dashboards so we can see what teams had what percentage of users or developers using the dog food builds. And we would do these friendly competitions where we would call people out that did really well and like call them out that didn't do so well. But now it's no longer an issue. Everybody does it all the time, 100% of the time. With a few exceptions maybe here and there, but like in general, that's what we do. And of course, we track everything. We have telemetry. So when we use this internally, we are our own first users, right? So we get crash and hang reports, we get telemetry, we get unhandled exceptions, all this sort of stuff just comes back into our telemetry system. And so we know before you get your hands on any of our software, we've already taken care of all the bugs that we could find that was the worst. And then we don't just release the software to you right after that. We go through a preview, public preview phase. So we have preview 1, preview 2, preview 3, however many previews it takes for us to get to a point where we're confident that it's not going to break you, it's done, it's polished, it's lovable. And then we release the general available build, but at that point, we're already dogfooding the next update. We're usually always 1 or 2 versions ahead. So for instance, right now, we just released SSMS, preview 1. I've been on preview 2 for a few weeks. Okay, just to let you know, our Visual Studio, we just released 17.13 preview 1. I'm on preview 2. That's the dog food build. So we're always ahead of the preview because then the preview comes out, and now we get to test it on real-world production scenarios. Thanks to you, whoever gets, because some of you want to be on the latest and greatest. So you get the preview built, and now we get even more data coming in, more bug reports, more kind of ideas of how to improve the things that we're building in those previews. And so by the time it hits GA, we are in a very, very good state. Now, it doesn't mean that we can foresee any crash and we can eliminate everything. It doesn't. Visual Studio is absolutely enormous. We estimate over 200 million lines of code, but no one really knows. And so it is unknowable. It's not that we can't count. That's a tale for another day. So I will highly encourage you to come up with some way of testing your software internally or with previews. If you don't have a preview program, maybe there's a customer or a couple of customers that are willing to, maybe you give them a discount or something, and they can get early builds, or maybe some of their users can get early builds to give you feedback early on before you roll things out. This is really something that has changed how we look at quality and how we work internally. But not everything is about external users. We also have internal users. And they're important too, of course. But usually when we're dealing with internal users, right, it's, if you're a security person, you might be like, hey, why is Why are you not filling out that thread model before you start implementing the feature? Just do your work, do the thread model. I wrote a wiki on how to do it. Here's step 1 through 18. Here's how to do it. It's super simple. Okay? Listen, only your manager reads your wiki. Okay? No one reads your wiki. And what we really want, we want to drive that behavior. Hey, here's the thing we want you to do, and we just write it down somewhere. No one knows where it's written down. They always have to ask you, why do you ask me every month for the link to the thing I wrote down that you're not going to follow anyway? Right? It's an uphill battle, often. I heard a little golf clap down there. Someone is like, yeah, man, that's my life you're describing right there. So what happens, though, if we turn it around and ask the same questions? Are we listening to our internal users? Are we showing them respect? And I think even more importantly and interesting is, do our goals align? We think they do, right? Because take developer division, we are building tools and services that developers love and enterprises trust. We have the same goal, right? Well, do we? I don't know, because our security people, they really want you to do those threat models. In fact, their bonus somewhat relies on you effectively being able to model the threat landscape of your apps. But from the product owner perspective, they don't have that goal at all written down anywhere for the success and the bonus of what they're doing. So maybe the priorities are not as aligned maybe as we think. So let's take a look at a recent use case of where we had this similar kind of thing going on, and it's in our go-to-market activities. They used to be really painful, and we're going to look at why that is and how we made them awesome. So what are our go-to-market activities? Well, with any new feature, we have a bunch of content that we want to produce. Right? We want to write blog posts. They usually come with screenshots. You know, they follow a personal voice. They describe a lot of the why. Then we have the release notes. We also have to do. They have to be more professional, more concise, to the point, not so not personal. And they don't describe the why. They describe the how. This is how you use it, or this is what it is. Rather, you have documentation that describes the how. How do you use it? We also have to do that. We either write the documentation ourselves or we work with doc writers. So if you're lucky enough to have doc writers, you work with them. And they need some sort of source material. And so we have to be on top of that situation. And then we have to do all the social media. So for us, Twitter and LinkedIn are pretty big. We're also doing videos. So TikTok is something relatively new for us, but YouTube. Right? So now video editing comes in. This is per feature. Any given product team might produce anywhere between 1 and 5 features per update, something like that. So this is a lot of extra stuff and a lot of tools to learn and to master and to just know. Photo editing, video editing, you have to be a good writer to, Word or Markdown. You have to know all the tricks, right? Git, well, you have to submit the release notes, so you have to know Git. And if you're a product manager, maybe that's not your strong suit. You don't necessarily know Git that well. And, even though that, someone wrote it on a wiki. So these are a lot of extra tools and skills that our teams have to possess. And if you're a new young PM, let's say, that just comes on the team from college or whatever, there's a lot to learn. This is not something you just go ahead and become proficient in overnight, right? So the problem was that we had all this stuff. There was no reuse. The consistency was poor. Some people used screenshots in light themes. Some used dark themes. Some used bubblegum theme. And there was just, writing styles were different. It did not sound or look any, professional in any way. And everybody just hated it. The workflow here with Git, do I clone or do I fork first? Do I create a topic branch? Do I do this? People just hated it. And the result was that not all of these go-to-market activities were performed on each of the features that we produced. And in fact, there was a lot of features that never had any of these things performed. That means that there were no documentation. There were no anything. Really, really bad. So here's what we came up with. We had our product teams just do one thing, and that is the green bubble in the middle. One feature, write one markdown file. That's all we want you to do. Put some screenshots in there, that's cool. But that's it. That's all you have to do. Then we invented a new title called the quarterback. And the quarterback's role is to take that green bubble and figure out how can I take that and multiply it into all these different scenarios. Create release notes, just generate using automations like Power Automate, tools to automatically take the source material and produce blog posts, all those activities. So use Copilot to generate the first draft of a blog post, for instance. So the quarterback, I'm the quarterback on the team. It's about 20% of my time goes toward this. So image editing, video editing, like copywriting, making sure it all sounds good. Editor-in-chief, right? That's part of what that role is. And of course, I cannot not write Visual Studio extensions. So it comes with full IntelliSense for you to write all these markdown files. You get error squiggles when your screenshots are not the right dimensions. All that stuff makes it super easy to preview it. So we started building up that whole tool chain. And we can produce automatically release notes. And these release notes were designed with the community. Right? So these are the type of release notes that our users want. And we just hit a button and it produces them through automation based on those markdown files. Social media we can now post out. What we found, by the way, that was kind of interesting is that when we post from our own personal Twitter accounts, we get a lot more engagement than when we do it from the Visual Studio Twitter account. So just an interesting side note, that might be something worthwhile experimenting with for you as well, how to optimize that. But we get more engagement than we ever had on social media based on all these. Now we have all these high quality screenshots and text and whatnot. And here on the right side, you see a Word document that's been written by Copilot. Based on those things, the quarterback reads through the draft, makes sure everything looks correct before handing it back to the product owner for final review. And the result of this has been absolutely fantastic. A lot more content of a much higher quality. Everybody's happy. The internal users are super happy about this. It's so easy. I forgot to mention that we took away Git. The way the Markdown works is that it's a SharePoint site. The only thing you have to do is to click a button in SharePoint. It then uses OneDrive to copy that folder down on your disk and syncing that. So you have a folder on disk. Each version has a folder, and you put your Markdown into that folder. That's it. Right? No Git, no any of that stuff. SharePoint has version control or history, file history. So we got it. We got it covered. Okay? Everybody's happy about this. They spend less time than they ever have, and they get more content with higher engagement all around. Internal users, external users, everyone is happy about this. So the reason why I wanted to emphasize the internal user case here is because, as my friend Jim, he says to me all the time, is the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And so if you want to be truly respecting the users and truly have that as part of your DNA, your culture, on your team, then you have to treat internal users the exact same way. So little things, they become big, they're important. Align your user goals, whether they're the same users or multiple different users, right? Cohorts, with your business goals. Dog food or preview whenever you can. And finally, treat your internal users as users. Side note, no one reads the wiki. Build the tools too. So with that, thank you so much for spending some time with me here. I hope there was something here that you can use at home in your companies. Have a great conference and stay in touch. Thank you.